Good evening and welcome to the GV Wire Forum on Measure P. And with us tonight we have two representatives from the Yes on P committee. And also we have Gary Bredefield, Fresno City Councilman. And I'd like to explain that about 11 days ago we extended an invitation to the Fresno Chamber of Commerce, which is leading the No on P campaign. They said they would provide two people to speak for their side, but as we came down to crunch time, they said they didn't have anyone available. People on vacation, people here, people there. So Gary Bredefield stepped up and will speak on the no side, but I would point out that Gary also doesn't back the Chamber's future proposal, which is a joint public safety and parks tax, and the Chamber has said that's why they're opposing Measure P. So we'll see where Gary wants to go tonight. He's usually not very shy about speaking his mind, that's for sure. So we'll start with the question for Measure P, and I don't know who's best to answer it, but I'd kind of like to lift the veil because we heard about all these talks between Mayor Brand and Fresno for Parks Committee that possibly there would be a joint proposal. And can either of you shed any light on, kind of give us a flavor of the negotiations and where you believe that the disagreement was?
Well, I'd really rather talk about Measure P itself because that's what we're focused on here tonight. And regardless of what happened in the past, what we're excited about is that we have a measure on the ballot that we think is a smart investment for Fresno, because we know that quality parks, recreation, and arts programs improve property values, they strengthen our economy, and they make our city a better place for people to live, work, and raise a family. And those are critical issues to our community if we want to continue to bring more business into the community and improve our economy overall. So that's why I'm excited about supporting Measure P. Another thing that you should know about Measure P is that Measure P fixes, updates, and maintains our parks, including repairs to restrooms, playgrounds, sports fields, and provides better access for people with disabilities. And those are investments that our city has chosen not to make over the past 15 years. And thankfully, we as citizens now have a chance to make that investment.
Thank you, Sharon. And Gary, I'll hark back to that. I'll try again. I just think that the citizens of Fresno deserve some transparency, and we'll have lots of opportunity to talk about Measure P tonight. From your standpoint, Mayor Brand brought a proposal forward that would be a joint public safety and parks initiative. It never went to a vote of the council because the mayor pulled it back when it was clear he would not have some support. You publicly opposed it. Can you shed any light on what the situation was at that time?
Well, I can't speak to the negotiations that took place between the mayor and the folks supporting Measure P because I wasn't there. In terms of the tax that was initially going to come before the council, that was a combination. There were a number of reasons why I think people didn't support it. I didn't support it because I have a problem supporting any additional taxes increases simply because I think we're overtaxed. The state is one of the worst states for taxation, and adding 3/8 on Measure P or 0.5% for a combination for me is in the wrong direction. We ought to be focusing our priorities on public safety, working within our means and the budget that the people and citizens of Fresno give us. And I think adding more taxes is the wrong direction because I think we can solve our problems without raising taxes.
Okay, so that fits in nicely with the next question I had planned for you. Not to put you on the spot, but we'll go back and forth.
Sure.
Many Fresno parks are poorly maintained. There's a tremendous shortage of green space and parks in South Fresno. If not Measure P, then how does City Hall address the problem given the obvious strain on the general fund?
Well, first of all, we are building a new park in Southeast Fresno. We're using $4.5 million of TCC money. The City College is also committing $4.5 million. So there is a park that is going to be built. It's about 10 acres, and that's happening in southeast Fresno. None of us disagree about the fact that we need more parks. None of us disagree that we need to maintain parks better. The issue becomes, what are our priorities as a community? This Measure P, as we talk about it, you will see, and I think people will understand as they look at the details of this, is a very flawed measure. It's requesting 30 years of 3/8 increase in the sales tax, which generates about $37 million a year, which ultimately with inflation will be $2 billion over 30 years. There's no measure that we've done locally that's 30 years. We've had Measure Z, which was 10 years, and it was 1/10 of a sales tax, not 3/8. We had a library tax that was 15 years, that was 1/8 of a sales tax, and this is 3/8, 30 years, and we'll talk about an unelected 9-member commission that's supposed to oversee this. So it's a flawed measure from top to bottom.
Okay, so Paul Gibson, what about that? Why 30 years? And because you had options there, and I'm sure there was discussion.
It takes a long time to make the investments. We are the beneficiaries. Our current 1,100 acres of parks we are the beneficiaries of those, and those have been accumulated over 5 generations. When our city started in 1872, the first Parks Commission actually didn't come along till 1909, and that group, who would be our great-grandfathers, if you will, and grandmothers, established Roding Park, and we're the beneficiaries of that. And like I said, another 1,100 acres of parks are in our system. We also are the beneficiaries of a brand new Fresno Parks Master Plan. I only printed the front page in color, but I noticed my colleague here, Sharon, has the full thing in color if you want the real city version. The Parks Master Plan is an incredible, detailed plan, courtesy of Gary and his colleagues on the City Council and Mayor Brand. They put this together beginning, I'm not sure, Gary, 2013, did work start on that?
It's been worked on for a number of years.
So almost 4 years. It was finalized at the end of 2017 and adopted unanimously by the Fresno City Council, endorsed by the mayor. Really a 300-page document that tells us how to move our current 1,100 acres forward and how to add acreage in order to accommodate the increase of about 150,000 new residents to Fresno who will be coming in the next 17 years. So it's really helpful, and Measure P follows this plan. That's where Measure P came from. And as you have questions, I'll be happy to point you into different parts of the Fresno Parks Master Plan, because it's really our roadmap to bringing our parks back and maintaining this incredible legacy on into the 6th and 7th generations.
So Gary, I know I've known you a long time, and I know that you make tough decisions on the council sometimes, and one of those tough decisions was you voted to build a $46 million downtown stadium. That would be $63 million in today's money. You've said 3/8 is too much, but it's $3.25 a month. People spend that on 1 cup of Starbucks. Is $3.25 a month, is that really going to hurt anyone in Fresno in exchange for having nice parks?
Well, first of all, I think we have to ask people who have trouble making ends meet. This is a regressive tax, which means that those who can least afford it will have to pay for it. I mean, those up here will have no problem paying for it. But, you know, it's 10 cents, it's $3. At the end of the day, it's 30 years, it's going to be almost $2 billion that'll be taken from people's pockets, our citizens, our economy, And we know that raising taxes slows down economies. We know we have no problem in this state taxing everybody, from gas tax to sales tax to property tax to death tax to everything. I mean, we discussed raising fees today, and thankfully that was turned down at City Hall. So the people who are proponents of taxation always make it sound like it's not a big deal, but taxes are a big deal. We are overtaxed, we are overregulated. And this measure, as we get into it, is flawed from top to bottom. I mean, whenever you want to get into the details, because it's always the devil in the details, that figure out really what this measure is about. People ask, and I commend them for getting all the signatures that they did to get it qualified. But when you ask people, do you want more parks? Do you like parks? I like parks, I want more parks, and I want to maintain the parks. This measure is more than just about parks. It's about cultural arts, it's about on-the-job training, it's all kinds of things. It wants to be everything to everyone, and it's a flawed measure.
So rather than ask a question, let's have a rebuttal from the Yes on P side.
Well, I would just mention that, in terms of public safety, which is something that we've heard a little bit about, Measure P really focuses on safety in parks and includes safety improvements for all parks by increasing security lighting, including a program for park rangers that will help secure parks, reducing graffiti, dealing with homelessness. And part of the way that we do that is by staffing our parks appropriately. And that you have to have funding to staff your parks appropriately and to maintain them appropriately. And so we have come forward as a coalition of concerned citizens. We want to help make our community a better place, help improve our parks for everybody in the community, and that requires a little bit more funding. It's a small amount for most of us, and just so that people know, sales tax is not charged on food. Just so that people know that, food and medicine is not something that you are charged a sales tax on. And finally, the measure does include strict accountability measures and citizen oversight, which personally I think is important. Now, I think Gary's a good guy. I think there's a lot of people in office that are good guys, but you never know who the next guy is. And so I, as a citizen and as a taxpayer, I like to see citizen oversight and some level of accountability beyond our elected officials. That's what's great about this measure. It has both.
So I'm going to stick right here with the question on that. Measure Z, I think most people would say, has been a tremendous success. Certainly it's saved our zoo and made it a regional, if not a national attraction. And, many 100,000 people a year go there. The zoo stumbled out of the gate with these accountability and transparency issues. And so let's dig into that a little bit about, if Measure P is passed, how will citizens be protected?
Well, it's right in the measure. The measure did end up 26 and a half pages long, but on the accountability side, there is a 9-member commission appointed by the mayor, and that commission serves in an advisory capacity, again, to help interpret this really detailed plan. And to Gary's point about additional things, the programs for cultural arts, the job training, the idea that we have park staff, is all in the master plan that the City Council approved unanimously in January of this year. So it's really helpful, and that's why those things are there. But back to the 9-member commission, their job is to hold citizen hearings so that we don't tie up City Council's time, and to work for the various districts. This plan calls out 3 districts specifically, District 1, 5, and 7, I think. I could look it up. And they're referred to as park deserts. It's where we don't have really any green space, or very little at all. So the idea would be to make sure all districts, Mr. Bredefeld's and everybody, all 7 districts, are properly looked at for each budget year. And then in terms of the money being spent, that is just like our city charter calls out for the council to approve and ratify the city budget, which would contain the numbers for the parks just like it always has. So there's really no outside authority. The authority remains with the mayor, the mayor's administrative staff, and the city council.
So I heard you say advisory, and I want to be clear. You have a 9-member board. It's appointed by the mayor or the mayor and the city council?
I'd want to dig before. I had always understood that the mayor made the appointments and the city council ratified those appointments, but I'd want to go back to the exact language to read it to you. But again, advisory is correct.
But at the end of the day, the city council has to approve the spending, has to approve the plan.
Exactly.
So, Gary, you said it was deeply flawed. You floated that night crawler out there.
Yeah.
Give us
All
some
right,
more.
let me say a couple things.
Some explanation on that.
First of all, you're not tying up the city council's time by overseeing billions of dollars. That's what we're elected to do. That's the accountability. We are elected and we are accountable to the people who elect us. 9 members who aren't elected aren't accountable to anybody. The 9-member commission would be appointed by the mayor and the city council. But let me tell you what their demonstrated expertise, according to their measure, would be. To be on the commission, you would have to have community parks and open space management experience, youth development or recreation program experience, arts and cultural programming experience, Trails and San Joaquin River Parkway development and programming experience. It says nothing about business, nothing about fiscal matters, but we're going to give them the opportunity to oversee $2 billion. They're going to be able to hold public hearings at the city council, determine and dictate to the city council where this money should be allocated and spent. That's in the measure. That's the devil in the details. The people who are accountable are the people like myself and other city council members and the mayor who run to represent the people. That's the accountability. And
So,
she mentioned...
Excuse me, the
Yeah.
city council would not be allowed to reject an idea?
Sure
or
they
say,
can.
Or
Of
say,
course.
this is a good idea, we can make it better this way?
The point is that you're having 9 members who will hold public hearings at City Hall and advise the council how this money should be spent. It is an unelected group of people who, frankly, were elected to do that. And I accept that responsibility, as does 7 council members and the mayor. In terms of the park ranger program and making this park safe, it sounds like they're coming from the Department of Forestry, but they're basically security guards, maybe have mace. They're going to face gang members who are sitting there with Uzis or shotguns, or homeless people who have weapons. They're in our parks now. We can't and haven't yet made every park safe, and yet we want to spend $2 billion to have other parks. We have almost 2,000 homeless. We have 20,000 gangbangers floating the city, and I think our priorities need to be making our city safe. If we want to attract people here, it's about making our city safe. And that's an ongoing struggle, and that's where the priorities need to be, not enhancing a flawed tax measure for 30 years to give to 9 unaccountable, unelected people. It's a flawed, deeply flawed measure. We've never had a measure in Fresno that has gone 30 years. We've had them for 10. Measure C has been 20 years. They've spent $1 billion over 20 years. These folks want to spend $1 billion over 30 years. I think when you compare the measures, it shows how flawed this measure is and why it shouldn't be supported.
Okay, so I have a question, and I hope it's not too technical. But a few years back, Selma passed a public safety tax, and this was pre-recession. During the recession, Selma City Hall, they laid off everybody practically but the city clerk. And at that time, the city council decided that they would take the money from the dedicated to public safety and spend it on the general fund. Citizens sued, and the courts ruled, ultimately, even though you said this money was going to be dedicated to public safety, it can go to the general fund. So if we're in hard times,
Well, I think, as you mentioned, that's a legal question, and I don't want to speculate about future legal matters. But the good thing about it is that, you know, from my perspective, I'm happy that this money is restricted. Our city does have a general fund that funds public safety right now, and our community over time has chosen to fund other things like our zoo, like our libraries, like our transportation and highways with special taxes. And so that's where the idea for Measure P came from. And we think it's the best solution to a very much needed investment in our park system. Our city has chosen to disinvest in parks over the past 15 years, and that has just been an economic reality. That's how our city dealt with the recession. We can all understand why those decisions were made, but now it's time to reinvest. And I'm so thankful that we have been able to come together as a community and put forward this measure that will really be transformational for our community in terms of improving our parks, trails, and open spaces.
So, Gary, I have a question. Police and fire budgets are now back to pre-recession levels. Obviously, the money doesn't go as far because the cost of things have gone up. Meanwhile, the parks budget is half of what it was pre-recession. So give the audience here an idea of what the city council will do to address this glaring need.
Well, first of all, let me say something about the legal issues. Part of this measure that's problematic is that this would freeze spending levels for parks from the 2017-2018 budget. So when we hit a recession, and we know we will, this mandates that we still spend the same amount of money that we're spending in parks, which is around $13-14 million. So if we have a recession, rather than being able to touch parks money, we will have to lay off police officers. That's what this measure does when we hit a recession, and we know we will. This tax will also overfund parks, because what it'll do is it'll add $37 million every year to our existing total parks budget of about $30 million, which will bring it to $68 million. That equates with the fire department. This is a flawed measure because it's generating millions and millions, ultimately billions over the 30 years. It takes the ability for those who are elected, who will follow me and follow Mayor Brand, the ability to determine where our priorities need to be. Again, nobody disputes the need for parks. We all agree. We love parks. We need more parks. We need to maintain our parks. But when you're elected, you have to make real decisions about what affects people's lives, and you have to make priorities. You can't just continue to go to people, tax them, and tax them. This is a solution that is flawed. We need more parks. We are building a southeast park for $9 million. And also, I want to say, in June, the state of California passed a bond measure. It was Prop 68. It was about $700 million that will go for parks. The city of Fresno will pursue some of those dollars. I don't know how much we'll get. They're doing the analysis. But we just passed a Proposition 68 in June, and that was $1 billion proposition for parks throughout the state. So we are doing everything we can. We seek grants whenever we can. We're pursuing bond measures that pass. This is not the right direction to go.
Gary raised park rangers. Can you tell us a little bit more about the park rangers? Has the concept been fleshed out?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because the park ranger program is something that we left open-ended in the measure, and so the city can determine exactly what those park rangers should be. They could be sworn officers. The city can choose how to create that particular program, and we did that intentionally because we don't consider ourselves experts on law enforcement. We think there are other people that are better qualified to make those decisions. We just know that we need better security in parks, and that's the way that we chose to write it into the measure.
Thank you. So let's turn to the audience now, and just a couple rules. State your name, where you live, and if you're a member of either side, yes on P or no on P, or you've given to other side, state that out so we can be totally transparent about it. And I'll just take the mic off and go to those of you that have questions. And your name?
Junso Ogawa,
And where do you live?
next door to Woodward Park.
Okay. And are you a member of either organization, yes on P or no on P?
No.
Okay. Ask your question.
All right, so now what happened when they lost the parking at New York, they negotiated, I understand, with the mayor, and now the city has put in a big concrete parking in Woodward Park. So now we've taken up green space for parking for the Little League. I don't think that's what was intended when we built the park. Some of the people in our association have tried to talk to the mayor's office and some of the other people down there, and they can't get a straight answer on this.
Okay. So, Gary, what about this big expanse of concrete that
Well,
was
it's
built?
at Kaiser Park that you're referring to with the River Park Little League. And that's a league that's been there for 20 years or more. And, you know, they've utilized the flood, that basin there, turned it into a great facility. And so there's been, when I came on the council, some efforts to enhance the area where they can access it because they got turned down from where they were accessing it before. And that's basically what's happened, and I think there's been some issues with it, and I think that's what the gentleman is referring to.
My name is Christina Garabedian, and I live over by Bullard High School, and both myself and my nonprofit have already endorsed Measure P. My question for you, City Council member, is what's the justification for passing this massive parks plan without significant funding to make it possible? Because my understanding is if the funding had been there, Measure P wouldn't be here because the parks measure would be funded already.
Well, the plan is a plan, and I mean, we all want to see such a plan develop. But you have to deal with the realities of the resources that you have. I mean, I would love for that to be built out tomorrow. I would love for us to maintain parks in a better fashion than we have, and way even before I came on the council. But we have to decide what our priorities are. Now, we do the best we can at maintaining parks. Can we do better? Should we do better? Absolutely. Would I love to have more resources? I absolutely would. But when you have 20,000 gang members here, when you have people breaking into cars everywhere, when there are burglaries going on, when we have a 911 system where people have to wait 5 to 7 minutes on the phone for somebody to answer when there's an emergency, I think we need to get our priorities in order. And I've been pushing hard at City Hall to put money towards the 911 because that's unacceptable to me. And in fact, we debated that today when we sold a lot down by Chachansey Park for $1.9 million, and I have made the effort to move that $1.9 million to public safety. Now, could we put it to parks? Sure, we could put some of it to parks, but for me, I want somebody, when they're in an emergency, to have somebody answer that phone within 15 seconds as mandated by the state. It's not always happening now, and that's why we need to focus our priorities on where they need to be. When you call the police, I think you should have a police officer come out. When somebody breaks into your car, I don't think you should be told, put it online and we'll deal with it later. That's a major problem for us. We all love parks. We all want parks. I want them to expand. And as I said, we're building a $9 million park in Southeast Fresno with TCC money and other people who are contributing. We're doing the best we can. But we need to make our city safe. And this measure is completely flawed. When you look at Measure Z, when you look at the library measure, this is overkill of what is needed in the city of Fresno. And it's by mandate, it's going to be looked at, all those billions of dollars, as I showed you, by unelected, unaccountable people who have no business experience, no fiscal experience. They basically like parks. I think we should do much better than that, than what we're doing there.
So my name's Ricardo Franco. I do live here in the city of Fresno, and my question is mainly to Mr. Bredefeld.
Yeah.
And I am a volunteer for the Yes on P campaign. I understand the concerns about public safety and the lack of funding for police and fire, etc. But why wasn't there enough concern in that camp to actually organize something and go out there and gather 30,000 signatures?
Great question. First of all, I've congratulated these folks on doing that feat. That was an incredible feat. I don't support doing that because I don't think we should be taxing people further for our public safety needs. I think there's a lot of waste at City Hall. I've addressed it publicly on programs that we have at City Hall that we should get rid of and fund our public safety. I've made motions and efforts to get that to be done. That hasn't been supported by some folks, and that's why we haven't gotten more police officers when actually there is money to do that. And I agree with you. If people support a public safety tax, I think they should have done the very same thing. Should have gone out there, got off their rear ends, and gotten signatures from people to get the tax. They didn't do it. These folks did. I congratulate them. But the measure is flawed, and it's overkill. and it's the wrong direction to deal with our parks issue. And the other thing about it, there's $200 million over the course of this 30 years that's assigned for arts and culture. Arts and culture. So anybody can apply for this funding if you're in the arts community or you're involved in cultural programs or things of that sort. This is not just about parks. They say it's about parks, but it's a lot involved besides just parks. And that's a problem as well, because there are all kinds of people that we might object that we call arts that can apply for these funds, these hundreds of millions of dollars over 30 years, and that's another reason why this is completely flawed.
Okay, so about rebuttal opportunity, or would you like to address that and talk about why the arts were included and answer some of what Gary had to say?
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last name, sir.
That's Ricardo Franco.
No, right here in the front. Oh, me? Yeah. Ogawa, Mr. Ogawa. I thought your discussion of Woodward Park might, if I could expand on it a minute, might help bring a little more light to the situation. I came here with my young family in 1984, and I remember learning that Woodward Park was established as a bird sanctuary. And I remember the incredible effort that one of the Rotary clubs did to put the amphitheater there. And I remember when the Shakespeare Festival got started, and now I guess Little League's coming. But what I see as kind of the underlying problem is Woodward is kind of the only park we've got in many ways. We have many, many West Side church congregations and South Central congregations supporting Measure P, because if they want to have an Easter event or a church social at a park, they have to pack up and drive to Woodward, because there are only 2 shelters left at Roding, and certainly the zoo's done an incredible job of the space they used up, but if they can't get those, Woodward's it. So one of the problems that I think your neighborhood is experiencing is the overall lack of parks and the fact that there are park deserts in other districts. And I remember the big commotion, and I won't get the name of the festival right. It's like the Grizzly something?
Grizzly Fest.
Yeah, and I know you all were worried about the noise, and you were worried about the potential crowds, and I heard it turned out really safe. In fact, somebody very, very high up in the police department told me, Paul, the event was really safe, and the real problem were the clouds of dust. Every time people moved, because the grass is gone, there were just huge clouds of dust. So we had a major 15,000 person event in your backyard. If we had more parks and some bigger regional parks in other parts of the city, you guys wouldn't be shouldering the whole load. And Measure P can solve a lot of that.
Howard Watkins, I live over near Bullard High, and I support Measure P because what it will do for the quality of life in Fresno. And I'm thinking, was there any discussion early on to join with the police department? Either the police coming to the parks people or the parks people going to law enforcement? Any discussion about let's do something together?
My understanding was that the mayor wanted to have a 1/4 cent, and again, I'm speaking just from what I know. I don't support either one of these, but he wanted a 1/4% for the police tax, and the parks a 1/4% for the park tax. The parks people refused. They felt that they needed more money, 3/8, and so they couldn't come to some agreement. Now, you can share that. I mean, whether that's accurate or not, but that's my understanding.
So the plan, and this goes back to a comment that Mr. Bredefeld shared about this being a lot of money, and it's important to realize that the plan that was approved unanimously by City Council itemizes in 2017 dollars $2 billion, a little over $2 billion. So the measure, which is in current dollars estimated at $1.2 billion, was a real good attempt to get started. That's really what we are not, we recognize it would be great to move Fresno out of its perennial last or near last place out of the top 100 cities. Well, I think 3 years in a row we got 100th. But really, this plan and following the Parks Master Plan, we think Measure P can get us solidly into the 50s or maybe the 40s, which I think would be a really great thing when those millennials who get tired of the high coastal prices want to come live in a town where you can afford a real house with a real front yard. So the parks plan itself is $2 billion. I do want to absolutely correct any indication that the 9-member commission, you've helped me with that, Bill, it is advisory. And therefore, some people are already thinking very creatively about what Measure P, when it is passed, can do. Mr. Bredefeld mentioned that the funding of parks is frozen at 2018. Well, the 2019 budget looks like it calls for about $1.5 million increase that won't be needed for parks. So that's $1.5 million that could be teamed possibly with the $3 million park ranger program. And given what I've been told about the cost, if it were the decision of the mayor, his staff, and council that they wanted to start park safety with sworn officers, that money could achieve somewhere between 45 and 50 new sworn officers. So there are some great benefits to other programs once P is passed.
My name is Dee Barnes. I work at the City of Fresno. I've been at the Fresno Police Department for 22 years. I started as a dispatcher, but I've been an accounting technician since 1999. What does our budget, how does it compare to the city of the same size?
A couple of things. That we're never ever going to lay off police officers. We lost police officers during the recession. They were gone. To say that you don't need all these officers, basically, you can never have enough police officers or prisons, I disagree with you. We can have enough officers when we need to meet the need. We are not where we need to be. We need at least 100 to 200 police officers to actually do an effective job of policing this community. So that's not true. You and I are going to disagree on that. We do not have enough police officers. If we hit a recession and this mandate where you have to keep a parks budget from 2017, 2018, you don't know what it could mean. That's the unintended consequences of this measure. That's why it's flawed. Again, I don't disagree with you about the need for parks. I don't disagree with you about improving the quality of life. We all agree with that and understand that. And Mr. Gibson said, you know, with this $2 billion measure, we can get from 94 to 50. Well, with $4 billion, maybe we can get to number 1. I mean, how much is enough? This is too much taxation. I've demonstrated how it compares to Measure Z. The library tax is completely different than those other measures, which were effective. They were limited in scope. The taxes were very limited, and they went directly to where they were supposed to go. This Measure P for parks is not just for parks. It's for cultural arts, on-the-job training, and numerous other things. And it's going to be overseen by 9 unelected people that do not need any experience. And they are to hold public hearings, to direct and give guidance to elected bodies how this money should be spent. If this passes, this will be a complete fiasco, and we will see it in the city of Fresno.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Carroll, and I live in Central Fresno. I am a supporter of Measure P. I have a question for you, Mr. Bredefeld. Sure. You mentioned that there was money that from a recent state proposition.
Yes.
Are you implying that that's available to us?
That's what we're looking at right now. It's a $1 billion bond, Prop 68, that just passed in June. It just passed. And so communities are obviously going to be pursuing those dollars. It's supposed to go to neighborhoods that are low income, that are in need. We certainly have plenty of those. And in fact, I talked to the mayor today, and his staff is looking into it. So that's a measure that just passed, $1 billion statewide, not a $2 billion local, but $1 billion statewide that just passed that frees up about $760 million that's supposed to go for parks. How much would be available to us? We don't know, but we're certainly going to pursue that.
So that's one of your fallbacks? Is that something that the city's thinking of counting on for our parks?
Well, I don't know that we can count on it. I don't want to mislead you.
Okay.
I don't know. That's something we have to pursue, and we will pursue it, but it's a statewide bond measure that just passed, and I'm not going to overlook the fact that that bond measure just passed, and it is for parks in cities throughout the state.
Right, but that's an if in Measure
Sure.
P when it passes.
Yeah.
How about matching funds for that?
We have to find out. It very well may be that we need matching funds. There's a lot of unknowns about that proposition. That's why I said I don't want to mislead you and say, oh, it's all there, it's waiting for us. We don't know.
Let me frame a question. What's in the city of Fresno budget for kids, especially kids that, let's say, live south of Shields or south of Shaw?
The mayor, former mayor, Ashley Swearingen, correctly worked with Fresno Unified and I believe Central Unified to open up their facilities after school. And that has been successful. That was about $1 million or more that the city put into that. That's an ongoing agreement and participation between the city of Fresno and the school district. That has been something that's helped kids with after-school programs. But I will tell you this, the best thing we can do for kids is to make sure they come home safe and don't get shot on their way home to school and coming from school. Let me say something about what the woman, let me finish, okay? The woman spoke about culture and arts. I agree. And culture and arts, I'm not against culture and arts. I support parks. I don't support this measure. This is overkill. And that's the problem. If these folks had come up with a measure that was similar to the library tax, the Measure Z tax, I think there would have been a lot more support for it. But this is a $2 billion tax over 30 years that will come out of our economy for much more than just parks. On-the-job training programs, culture and arts, and again, I think people can gloss over who want to just support this because it's a feel-good measure. Everybody loves parks. My interest is in looking at the details of what's involved here. This is a flawed measure. It will have numerous ramifications for people who are overseeing billions of dollars, who have no experience managing money in an appropriate way, and we will have people who are activists who want to see money go to places that people who are paying those taxes don't want to have those dollars going.
Elliot Balch. I live in Central Fresno. I'm involved with the Measure Yes on P campaign. So the question is, are you comfortable, Councilman Bredefeld, seeing all of that money from Prop 68 go to jurisdictions like LA County instead of here?
No, but I also disagree with what you said, because I looked at that proposition as well. And $1.3 billion will be dedicated to parks with the largest amount, $725 million, going towards, quote, neighborhood parks in park-poor neighborhoods. I've done my research, and Prop 68 does that exactly. So we don't want any money to go. We want to pursue every dollar that we can. That's what the mayor's doing with his administrative staff. I just spoke to him today about it. And so they're looking into that. I don't want to see any money go somewhere else, but this is a flawed measure no matter how we look at it. We're all for parks. I support parks. I've had many parks built. Selma Lane Park when I was on the council, and other parks. We're building some dog parks for people who love dogs out at Bob Belcher Park. And other council members are doing the same thing. I see other council members improving their parks. We just had Inspiration Park built in Council President Soria's district. It's not like parks haven't been built, aren't going to be built, and as I talked about the Southeast Park that's going to be built, that's a 10-acre park. So this is a flawed measure. It is completely overkill. We've never seen anything like this. I'm opposed to this on many levels, but this is clearly overkill in terms of a $2 billion tax for not just parks, on-the-job training, culture and arts, and overseen by 9 members of people who are not accountable to anyone.
Okay, and final thoughts from the Yes on P side. And also I want to thank Gary for filling in for the No on P committee, which didn't come today. And I will point out again that Gary's position is different than the Chamber of Commerce. He's no on parks, he's no on public safety. Chamber of Commerce wants to defeat Measure P and then come back with a joint public safety Parks proposal.
But
So,
but the chamber is opposed, as is the police officers, firefighters, Mayor Brand, and.
well, I have not seen Mayor Brand say that publicly. Am I missing something? When did that come out?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So, yes on P, you get the last crack at it.
Bill, thank you, and I want to thank GV Wire and the Islamic Cultural Center for having us tonight and those people that came. Measure P is a very smart investment for Fresno. It's going to bring us quality parks, recreation, arts programs that will improve property values, strengthen the economy, create jobs to keep our community a desirable place to live and work and raise a family. The Bay Area Council recently surveyed Bay Area residents, and 46% of them want to leave. They're tired of the crowd and they're tired of the expensive homes. Maybe Fresno will attract them if we can pass Measure P. The measure fixes and updates, maintains our parks. The very first thing we'll go after is, and I'm sure the Commission and the City Council will work on the $225 million of deferred maintenance that is not sitting quietly in our 1,100 acres of parks. Rather, it is getting worse every day. It'll include repairs on restrooms, playgrounds, sports fields, and better access for people with disabilities. Measure P ensures safety improvements. All parks will get added lighting, security cameras, funding for park rangers, which will be decided at the discretion of the City Council and the Mayor and his staff, and work in conjunction with the Advisory Parks Commission. There will be work on preventing graffiti and reducing the homelessness in parks. The measure includes strict accountability measures and citizen oversight, and it will ensure that funds can only be spent on the projects that are included in the measure and cannot be taken by the state or misused by the city. Please vote yes on Measure P.
And so I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and we'll have a video of tonight's event up on GV Wire. That's gvwire.com. So tell your friends to tune in and hear both sides of this important ballot measure on November 6th. And I know everybody here is probably registered to vote, but October 22nd is the last day. If you haven't registered, be sure to do so. Thanks for coming. Have a safe drive home.